I lovingly call this video Aristotle 2. The second part of talking about Aristotle and his view on rhetoric, particularly as it pertains to invention. We left off at the types of reasoning, but more importantly, the types of proofs that Aristotle provides, because he says that all of them, your inartificial and your artificial proofs, have to be successful in order for you to be successful in influencing your audience. So, the artificial proofs are the ones that are most commonly affiliated with Aristotle: ethos, logos, and pathos. You might think, oh, well, I know what that is because ethos has always been ethics and credibility, and logos has always been logic and reason, and pathos has always been emotion. And that's a pretty simple way of looking at it that most people do. Ethos actually does not just deal with ethics. It is about being a good person. In fact, Aristotle said, if you do not have goodwill towards your audience, you will not be persuasive in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you won't even be practicing rhetoric, because if you don't want good for your audience, then you shouldn't be speaking. So goodwill was very important. So just being a good person and just doing the right thing did not give you instant ethos, though, or good ethos. Ethos is creating a belief in the audience that you have goodwill towards them. And yes, that does have to do with two things: character and competence. And that character is immediate, and it's from your past, and it's also about your future and how people are going to view it later. So character, you have three kinds. You have long lasting, you have immediate, and then you have, during the speech, the constant maintenance of your credibility, which means that your reference to outside sources and to sources of data has to be impeccable as well. The other part of ethos, though, is competence. I couldn't even say the word. Competence is how much knowledge you have, certainly, but it's more importantly how much knowledge the audience perceives that you have about a particular thing. Clinton and Trump are really good examples of different types of ethos. They both have certain things that people really like about them and certain things that people really don't. But if you were going to ask me which one of them has more competence, I would ask you, in what way do you mean competence? I mean, if we're talking about who can run a business, that answer might be different from who can run a government. That type of ethos is actually the problem that most of the candidates are having right now. Let's be fair. Ethos goes beyond just I'm able to establish credibility, but is more about I'm able to make my audience understand that I have goodwill towards them, that I'm believable, and that everything that I'm telling them is what they need to know to make an informed decision. When Aristotle said that dialectic and rhetoric are counterparts, he was talking about this point where rhetoric begins. It's a point of stasis. Some people call it stasis. It just depends on where you were trained. Me being from the Northeast, I generally say stasis, and Dr. Morse usually says stasis, and we debate these things because we're bored sometimes, very rarely. Stasis is that point in between two equally opposing viewpoints or ideas or concepts. So right here, in between my two middle fingers, we have stability. That stability is created by these two equal but oppositional forces: guilt and innocence, good and evil, heaven and hell, peanut butter and chocolate. I'm getting off topic. I'm ready for my midnight snack. The idea that we should live in stasis is a ridiculous idea. But according to Aristotle, that is where rhetoric begins, because that's where a choice has to be made. If that is true, then logos becomes incredibly important. Logos is not, it's not logic. I'm sorry to break everybody's hearts. That's not what it means. In Greek, it actually means word. Logos, word, language, is really about how your reasoning is communicated. That is to say, how your reasoning is put into language. Your language must represent the reasoning that you are using. And so logos goes much deeper than just logical ideas or thoughts, which is what we boil it down to now. Finally, pathos, more than just passion, more than just emotion, more than just the use of emotion. Puppies and children help us get involved in wars, or puppies and children can persuade people of anything. Almost always true, by the way. And if you saw Wag the dog, you know what I'm talking about. Pathos actually comes from pathetic, and empathetic comes from pathos. If you can make your audience understand that your passion is for them to benefit from what you have, the sort of I feel your pain method to a public speech, that is pathos. Sarah McLachlan's advertisements on television are beyond pathos. They're almost to the point of maudlin. They're almost to the point of manipulative, really, if you think about it. And Aristotle never intended for pathos to be mistaken for something that was not persuasive, or something that was tricky, or something that was ethically questionable. So if you're using pathos and you're not using it ethically, you're not doing it right, and you're not going to be successful. Aristotle really talks about 3 genres of rhetoric. And in fact, he says there's only 3 times you really need to engage rhetoric. And that is in the situations that he refers to as deliberative, epideictic, and forensic. Forensic, of course, the idea that we can take something apart and put it back together, but it's something that happened in the past. Guilty or innocent, forensic. So courtroom rhetoric is really considered forensic address. The idea that we look at something that's happened in the past in order to understand it in the present. Epideictic address is about living in the present, and something occurred, and therefore we should respond to it. Ceremonial address, of course. Everybody just graduated from high school. Somebody gives a commencement speech. Somebody gets married. You give a toast. Somebody is celebrating an anniversary. You give a toast. Somebody gets married. You give a eulogy. Okay, yes, it's true. That's not what you should do. But somebody died, you should give a eulogy. The idea that everything in epideictic address is based on what's happening at the time. Finally, deliberative or judicial. A lot of people don't understand how the deliberative is considered to be actually a part of the political. Because we're talking about the future, what should or should not be done. And so deliberative, to deliberate, to think about what should be done, belongs only in times of when we're talking about making policy for the future, which we may or may not be a part of. And so only at those times should rhetoric exist. And we use the word so lightly that everybody believes that rhetoric just is constantly going on all the time, and we're surrounded by it. You can't get out of it. I'm going to suggest that maybe that's because politics has invaded everything that we do. Even comedy channels are all political news shows. It's kind of, well, I don't know if it's sad or humorous or what I should feel about it, but I will say that there's some reason to suggest that it is in fact true that rhetoric has invaded our lives and is incredibly pervasive, not persuasive. I'll leave you to read the rest of Aristotle and to ask me questions about it. And here's what I'll just say. Aristotle is probably the most important person, not just because he wrote the book called On Rhetoric, although that helps, but also because he actually responds to Plato, and he was a contemporary of Isocrates and some of the sophists, but he actually is later reorganized by Cicero, and that becomes incredibly important. These are all the videos I'm going to post right this minute. I am also going to do the following. Number 1, I will talk about Isocrates and the sophists. I will have another video processing for that, but these take a long time to process. to put up on YouTube. And so once I get them recorded, it takes a little bit of time. Secondarily, I would like you all to post questions to the discussion board that I have put up tonight that where I'll respond to those. So I do a whole separate video where I do nothing but respond to your questions. Some of you seem very interested in getting my interpretation of things and getting a response. And so we'll do that. And maybe we'll start using the voice thread a little bit more because some of you said that you actually really like that tool. So we'll see what we can do. You will be hearing from me again this week. I will talk to you soon.